Welcome to all C3F members and friends throughout the nation and indeed around the world, and a special welcome to the folks at Veterans for Freedom as we stream to them on their dedicated social media channels. Our C3F In Hot session today is both topical and controversial as it deals with the Canadian shakeup brought on by President Trump's very real threat of destroying Canada economically with large across-board tariffs. In doing so, he has forced the nation to consider its very underpinnings, with some stating flatly that it would be better off taking up Trump on his offer to become the 51st state. In Hot is fortunate to have with us a very able wingman as it rolls in on such a possibility in the form of author and analyst Julius Ruschel. Julius is no stranger to In Hot. His analytical brilliance has been called upon to dive deep into complex subjects, including the real facts behind the Wuhan virus pandemic measures and climate change hysteria. By way of introduction, Julius says it does not matter, and I quote, "It does not matter who I am, what credentials I bring to the table, or how well I can fluff my resume to project an aura of expertise. If what I write has value, my bio should be irrelevant, as who I am will be revealed in the spaces between the lines. Besides, the less you know about me, the less reason you will have to trust me, which means you will be forced to consider the quality of my evidence that I lay on the table based solely on its merits. And you will have nothing but my thought processes to help you judge whether the conclusions I reach are justified." End of quote. I can certainly attest to the quality of the evidence you produce, Julius, and it's a great pleasure to have you with us on In Hot once again. And this particular session, I'd like to kick it off with a share screen, if you don't mind, to introduce the subject material. And I'm going to share this. This is an update that I wrote last week, 7 February, as a matter of fact. And I'm going to roll down here. It was entitled Fisher Cut Bait. And it talks about Trump and the Monroe Doctrine, some of his concerns. And I outlined some courses of action. And I say that in response to Trump, Canada has been living under the shadow of an economic behemoth since it was formed in 1867. And its broad brush courses of action have always been the same. And there's 3 of them: go with America, go with the empire, or go its own way. The empire in this case used to be the British Empire, but now we're looking at the globalist empire, maybe homing in on the WEF and the United Nations. So I'll stop the share there. And Julius, I'll mention the fact that I've seen one of your recent essays come out and say the 51st state is the way to go, and we should look at it as Canadians should be truly fortunate in that that option is going to give us a get out of jail free card. Could you explain what you meant by get out of jail free card?
Yeah, I mean, I think before I start into it, I want to clarify it too, is that, like there's a lot of reasons, like, I mean, you've spoken about trying to go our own way, and I think there are a lot of benefits to that. My biggest concern is I don't know how to get there, right? Like this is the issue that, like, every time I try to game this out in my mind as to how to approach it, it's like you run into a brick wall. And I mean, we can get into that a little bit later on. But I
Yeah.
mean, this is where, like, when I see the speed of things which are unraveling, like in the end, I feel like I'm being asked to choose between loyalty to my community versus loyalty to my country. And it's like, if I have to make that choice, the thing that comes first is my community. I mean, when I see how fast things are unraveling, how quickly, businesses are leaving, people that I know that are that have, over the last 4 years that have moved outside of the country, the young folks that are starting to consider leaving, like, this is not something where we have decades to solve this. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we've wrecked our, like, I mean, that was the main point. It's like we've wrecked our country, and here comes Trump with an offer of full statehood. It's like a get out of jail free card, where all of a sudden we get a constitution, we have market access, and we have a lot of the forces come into play to start to fix what's been happening for our own communities. And I think that's the main reason why I'm open to that whole idea, is that
Yeah.
it's like, if we have to, like, what are we willing to sacrifice to get out of this? And I think this is where, if we actually lean into it, there is an opportunity to try to use that annexation or merger as a way of also asking for preconditions to solve some of the issues that are tearing America apart. I mean, America is slowly transitioning from republic to empire, you know? And
Yes.
so, I mean, in many ways, America is becoming what we already are. And I mean, this is where you can, if we had anybody with some brains negotiating this instead of the clowns that we currently have in Ottawa, you say,
Mm.
listen, like, you know, we're literally the ultimate warning why we need to reverse this centralization and expansion of federal power. And so like that to me is, you know, an opportunity to say, listen, you know, we've got a huge country. There's a lot of benefits for you guys. Let's do some of these proposals to bring us back to the decentralized bottom-up republic that America's founding fathers actually wanted. And within that process, you actually do everything you need to protect the sovereignty of each individual province within that, you know, larger structure. I mean, now,
Like a state, like a
yeah,
state. Each province would have
yeah,
the full power and authority of the states as they exist in the United States now. Now
yeah. I
you
mean,
mentioned,
every single state is essentially a sovereign country within the larger treaty. That is being eroded. But I mean,
yeah.
the degree of autonomy that each of those states has within the Union far exceeds the autonomy that Canadian provinces have within Confederation, ironically.
Now you mentioned, the states is on the way to becoming an empire. Now, I want to home in on that, but first I want to share a screen, and this kind of surprised me.
Yeah.
Uh, you pulled a fast one on me, and what you did was you put a tweet out there, and and you said, okay, if your province, this is going on your X file. If your
Yeah.
province was offered U.S. statehood today with full rights equal to every other state, would you vote to join the United States? And then it said, please share widely. I'm debating this question with my friend Russ Cooper later this week, and here we are. So give us your feedback in the comments below, and lo and behold, like there's 12,857 respondents, and 70% of them say, "Yeah, let's go." I'm gonna
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop sharing there, but that just knocked my socks off. And I thought when I read that, just a few nights ago, I think you put it up. I thought I'm walking this discussion with Julius on the back foot here. I'm on the ground on my back already. 70%. Are you
Well,
surprised with that number, 70%?
well, and it's the other, there's what was it, 17% are people that just wanted to see the results. So those are probably Americans that are and other Europeans and whatnot. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's actually like if you just take the pros versus cons, it's 86%, which I mean, I was blown away. And what really surprised me, because I mean, obviously it's weighted towards folks that are already following me. So like the very first people to see it are likely to be leaning more in the direction of the arguments that I've put.
Yeah.
But what surprised me is that, you know, that first batch of people, the first 1,000 or so that jumped in, it was sitting around 76%, and whereas now it's at 70. But after that, it's stabilized at the 70. And I mean, at that point, it's other people sharing it, just, you know, floating out on the Twitter sphere.
Yeah.
So it didn't actually move much beyond that. Like it stayed stable all the way up to the 12,000 mark, which tells me that there is actually wider support than what I anticipated.
Yeah. Now that tells me that our government, the Canadian government, you hear them all the time talk about Canadian. They speak on our behalf. They say Canadians will have nothing to do with any kind of a 51st state option. There's no way the vast majority of Canadians would never go for that. And we look at this number, 70%. And it tells me that maybe the Canadian government and our political leadership has some explaining to do. They have to make a case.
Yeah.
It's up to them to make a case for Canada. And quite frankly, I can't see them making a case. All they do is they seem to be blustering about how they insult Trump, and I don't think, quite frankly, that's the way to go with that man. But they insult him, and they insult Americans, and they boo at hockey games the American anthem, and uh, this is totally we're not thinking this through. There has to be a case made. And for myself, you talk about, let's get back to empire. You talk about America becoming an empire. I would posit that America already has become an empire, and
Yeah.
we saw it unrolling shortly after World War II, when when we saw America start to develop a hegemony over the world, and and putting its imperialistic intentions out there, influencing countries to go their way one way or another. And we're seeing now with this Dodge, the Department of Government Expenditure coming out down in the States with Elon Musk, that there's a lot of funny stuff going on out there with U.S. aid, with America's foreign policy, with the State Department. There's a lot of stuff going on out there that Americans are totally blindsided by. We're looking at U.S. aid funding drag dance festivals in Guatemala. We're looking, and on the bigger side, we're looking at them funding gain of function activity and Echo Alliance, which ultimately wound up giving us the Wuhan virus and all the problems that developed back from 2020. So when you look at empire and Canadians, I think should be thinking is when we talk about becoming a 51st state, just what are we joining? Are we joining that empire that's been established since World War II, with all of its finagling and all of its subterfuge, or are we going to be joining a Trump promise? And you see with Trump, his promise of visibility, transparency, we the people, the people having a say in how the government runs, getting back to the original Constitution. So, what do you think about that? Do you when you look at the 51st state option, are you saying that Trump's America will be the America that goes on into the future?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how this evolves from this point forward. We're at a dangerous tipping point in all directions, right?
Yeah.
But I think what people I think in Canada have an impression that our system works very similar to the United States, and that we're actually given that it's kind of a trade-off of one versus the other. When in reality, even despite all of the problems in America, the American Constitution has so many different layers of ability to push back that is just not existent in the Canadian parliamentary system. And
Yeah.
I think that this is where, and I think there is a distinction to be made. Like the American system has always given the executive branch very, very strong power over foreign policy, over borders, over like anything external looking, right?
Yeah.
And also to deal with interstate trade. But I think where the big change is happening is that the states themselves are losing their ability to manage their own affairs because the federal government is sort of oozing over top of all of those authorities.
Yes.
I mean that to me is the main risk of empire. That's the transition from bottom up republic to
Yeah.
top down centralized controlled imperial
And I
system.
might say that it seems to me that the federal state and the states up until Trump's coming on board as president, the federal states seem to be in an underhanded fashion making things happen without the knowledge of we the people,
Yeah.
and they've done so, and I think we really saw that during the Biden years we saw. I guess there's a chap in the states. His name is Michael Benz, and
Yes.
he talks about the blob. The blob is the intelligence security community. It's the deep state. It's agencies like USAID, and he talks about that blob initially looking outwards at foreign entities, at foreign countries, destabilizing, making them dance to the American tune type thing. But he notes that around 2016 timeframe, in the time where Trump came on board as his first term, in the same time frame as Brexit, which followed quickly on the heels of the immigration doors opening wide in Europe, he saw that from 2016 onwards, that community, the blob, turned its attention to the citizen, the American citizens, and what it did was it came up with cybersecurity being an area that had to be defended against, and it used the mantra of cybersecurity to apply it to America proper, the domestic realm, and say that we've got to watch out for cybersecurity and disinformation. And that disinformation, what happened was all of a sudden within the American context, disinformation was a cybercrime.
Yeah.
And now you could have the FBI chasing down parents who were going to school board meetings, making a fuss about gender ideology. All of a sudden, these people are terrorists, and they were termed terrorists. So that's the empire I see is we talk about things being on a very, very shaky ground here. I think America, and the same things happen in Canada, by the way. This disinformation has just been taken up full course in Canada. I think Canada, America, Europe, the whole Western world is just shaking on this whole disinformation framework.
Well, there's one of the questions that somebody threw at me a little while ago is they asked, like, if Biden was still in power, would you still be willing to go with the 51st state?
That's my
And I
question.
said, yeah. And I think that, you know, I had to think about it for a bit, but it's true. Like, I think I would still go for that option simply because, like, even under the Biden administration, there were all still court cases that were reining it back in. I mean, this over and over and over again. So, like, it's not that the impulses for control are there for sure,
Wow.
but the
Wow.
difference is that when you actually want to push back, you do have so many different layers that you can actually push back on. I mean, even the way that the judges are selected in the United States, that the president can only nominate a Supreme Court justice, and now you have both Congress and the Senate and House of Representatives weighing in on this and having to confirm that nomination. Like, again, there's always these multiple layers of giving your people's representatives a chance to weigh in on that. Whereas in Canada, I mean, they're appointed by the prime minister, just flat out, right? And then
Yeah,
you
I see
have,
your point. I see
and I
your
mean,
point. I'm thinking about even during the Biden reign, they had that court case, Missouri versus Biden,
yeah,
where Elon Musk came along, opened up the Twitter files, and all of a sudden the Twitter files became evidence in the Missouri v. Biden case. And the judge in that case said he had never seen anything. He thought in the whole of American history, there was never anything so censorious as the Biden administration and what it did to, shape the information sphere.
yeah,
And I take your point. Okay, they do have those judges there that we the
yeah.
people have an input into, and I take your point that in Canada it's totally different, and we got a big problem because we have a very centralized government in the and the prime minister sits at the top of it, and he's selecting judges at the federal level, Supreme Court judges, federal judges. He's selecting senators. He has basically with his cabinet the ability to become a dictator, and I think it's fair to say that we've seen that happen over the course of the past 9 years. I mean, there's not even any pretense about that anymore.
No, and I think our system has been built that way from day one. I think that's one of the big differences between our systems is that, the Americans have eroded their constitution by ignoring parts of it and by amending some parts of it away. But like the original decentralized structure that gives the people ability to push back on all sorts of things is there. It's just waiting to be rediscovered. Whereas in
Yeah.
the Canadian case, we have to basically start right from scratch. I mean, we need to strip out so that the prime minister is elected separately. We need to have a complete Senate reform to break this broken Senate system that we have. Like, we have to redo how the judges are selected. We need to change, how interprovincial commerce works. I mean, it just like we basically need to become a constitutional republic to give the people a say over their own affairs in their own provinces, right?
Well, what
So
do you say? What would you say about instead of becoming a constitutional republic? That's a very, very big step. That's a sea change.
yeah.
I would imagine that'd be take decades and decades to make happen. I'm not sure though. But what do you say about the option of going our own way and instead of starting from scratch, take what we have and work our way back down the scale, away from dictatorship, away from tyranny, away from such centralized control to a more decentralized confederation where we see I kind of would like to see going back to the earlier times, Canada around the turn of the century. Laurier, Sir Wilfrid Laurier, back in 1905 or something like that. he said that the 20th century belonged to Canada. And my read on history is that he was bang on. He was right. The 20th century, the first half of it, did belong to Canada. We saw World War I, where we really became our own independent nation. We saw ourselves perform magnificently in World War II as a major world power. No two ways about it. I mean, the third largest navy, the fourth largest air force. I mean, we were everywhere, and we were making a big difference. And then the 50s came in, and there was that golden age in the 50s. I grew up as a boy in the 50s, so I'm kind of dating myself here. But I remember being so proud of Canada because back at that time in the 50s, there was a general feeling. You could feel it in the public. There was a pride in the nation, and people would say, this outfit here costs more, but if you buy the Canadian outfit, it's much better quality and it lasts longer. Things that were made in Canada were deemed to be superior, and quite frankly, on most counts, they were. And then we had this massive, after World War II, we had this massive manufacturing output. We had people like C.D. Howe, the Minister of Everything, come forward and basically create a manufacturing substructure to Canada, and we were producing stuff all over the place and exporting it, and we were building highways and pipelines in the military sense. I remember that was the time where we built all of our military bases. Back in the 20s, the first job of the RCAF was to map the Arctic. We're up north mapping the Arctic, and then we're up north developing the distance early warning line with our friends in the States. And it was really a time where Canada was going on its own, and it was on its way to the stars, I think. But then all of a sudden, we had the 60s and the 70s, and we had Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And all of a sudden, we have these centralized ideas coming on board, and basically the nation hasn't come back from that ever since. Now we're in this perennial state of trying to give people money, trying to make people dependent. And so I say, let's go backwards. Let's go back to Sir Wilfrid Laurier's promise of the 20th century belonging to Canada. Let's make the 21st century belong to Canada. That's where I'm coming from.
I think, coming a bit also from the Western perspective, that we've seen from our end of it here that right from the very beginnings of Canada's foundation, that there's a kind of a top-down national planning, and those that benefit from that truly do feel like they're living in a golden age. The problem is that those that are being steamrolled in order to make that happen have no voice to stop it. Right? I mean, this goes right back to, Sir John A. Macdonald's railroad plans. It wasn't just that it was corrupt from the very beginning, but the very first thing that they did when they actually completed it is give the Canadian Pacific Railroad a 20-year monopoly on rail traffic, and legally blocked the farmers in the prairies from opening any lines to connect to this vast American market just south of the border. So they
were afraid of the north-south axis.
Yeah.
They were afraid of that. Yeah.
But what it actually did is that the eastern provinces essentially were able to suck every last ounce of profit out of the Canadian farmers on the way for that, because they were stuck using that one rail line.
Yeah.
And it triggered a mass exodus of farmers from the Canadian plains down to America. And I think this is what we also don't see, is that because of this, I mean, this is ironically one of the reasons what would be nice about keeping two separate freedom-loving countries is that we have over our history constantly absorbed each other's steamrolled citizens. I mean, we've absorbed.
You got someplace to go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at we took in somewhere between 25 and 125,000 draft dodgers during the Vietnam era. And I mean, it's the same thing, like America absorbed all of those farmers during during the Macdonald Railway era, or during Pierre Elliott Trudeau's nationalization of the energy system. So we are absorbing each other's, disadvantage. And I wonder how much more broken Canada would be if those communities were actually piling up in Canada because they have nowhere left to go. I mean, even like during, I don't know if you have ever heard of the story of Grise Fjord in the high Arctic on Ellesmere Island.
Yeah, I've heard about it, where the people are moved back and forth around, and but go ahead.
Yeah, because I mean, this to me is it's sort of the a perfect sort of encapsulation of how the top-down planning in Canada has worked. Is that because in the 1950s the fur trade was collapsing, and so there was a whole bunch of Inuit in northern Quebec on the Ungava province
Mhm.
that the Canadian government decided, well, since the fur trade isn't going to work, it's time to return you people to, your traditional way of life. And so they
Yeah.
promised them this they talked them into relocating to a new area. And of course, first of all, they would actually tell their like the different communities, oh, the other one has already agreed, so you guys should agree too. So they played games with these people, and
Okay.
then they relocated them to Cornwall Island and Ellesmere Island,
Yeah.
2,000 kilometers north above the Arctic Circle,
Yeah.
and then even split them up. Like they promised them that they're going to be together, and then halfway up, ironically, on the steamship was called the CD Howe.
Oh no.
Yeah, that's why it reminded me of that story when you told me about this.
Oh,
And so then they took them up there, and the deal was that if you don't like it after 2 years, we'll bring you back.
yeah.
Well, they dumped them off. They were promised a proper village. There was no buildings there whatsoever. Grise Fjord is like it's in between two islands, so you've got this canyon effect, which means that you're basically without any sunlight down there for 6 months. And of course,
Oh
there
my
was no
goodness.
game. And these
Okay.
people were on the verge of starvation. Like it took them decades to figure out, how the whale migrations work and whatnot. Like it was just hell. And then the government reneged on taking them back south. And
Okay.
so they basically, and the main reason the government did this is that they needed to establish their sovereignty over the high Arctic islands that were currently uninhabited. So Cornwallis and Ellesmere had nobody there, so they just found some people and moved them there, right?
Yeah.
And there's no way to push back on this. I think this is where I feel like there's such a vast difference between our Canadian and the American system is that it's so much easier for a small minority to throw a wrench into this sort of planning, and that the federal
Yes.
government does not
Yes.
have that kind of authority in the United
Yes.
States, for better or for worse, right?
No, I see your point, and that 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 centralized and top central over centralization is really can be deleterious. That's a great example, the Grease Ford example. But I'm thinking also of when you have a small group at the top that's controlling everything, then that's an easy target for someone to come in who's got some bad ideas to corrupt the country, because to corrupt the whole country, all you have to do is corrupt the top couple of people, maybe in an office or two, high up the chain, and all of a sudden you've got a situation where I think we're dealing with it now. I think we're dealing with uh, organized international organized crime setting up shop in Canada. There's a reporter who does great work. His name is Sam Cooper, and
Yes, I've been
he
watching
talks
his
about
stuff.
this in his book Willful Blindness, and he doesn't hold back any punches. He's saying that the ports of Vancouver and Montreal are totally corrupted. Toronto is a big base for money laundering, so we have Vancouver and Toronto laundering money on behalf of Chinese propped up cartels and organized crime. And that's actually Sam says this is the reason. He says that's the reason why Trump is being so obstinate and being so difficult with Canada, because he can't stand to see a failed state on his northern border. He's got one with Mexico, and he's going to have one with Canada, and he's not going to have any of it. So he's pushing the
No,
Monroe Doctrine, is what he's doing. A safe
that's
North
right.
America, I think, is what he's doing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that, China and America are kind of in one, like they're kind of trapped in the Thucydidean trap where each one is watching the other's strength and is building up, right?
Yeah,
And I think that the degree to which China has, built its footprint in North America, from the Panama Canal to what's going on in Canada, is just
yeah,
extraordinary. Like when I first heard about it, it's like, okay, there's a few people that are pushing their Thailand stuff and stuff, and I didn't take it that seriously. And it's actually through Sam Cooper's stuff that I've started to get a sense of just how deep this actually goes in Canada. Like
Yep.
I mean, he was describing the degree to which the triad people, like some of these organized crime, are like he's demonstrating links throughout our entire system, right?
Yes. Yes.
And even some connections like to some of our political parties. So I
Yes.
mean, you know, this is not something that is just about, you know, a few people doing drugs. Like this is on a scale that is, you know,
Yeah.
it's
Now,
existential to North American security.
yes, it is existential. Now, you would like to see the 51st state option going forward, I would imagine, because that's probably a better way to address these really existential concerns.
Well, the
I would like to see Canada go its own way. Not hanging its hat on any empire, whether it be the globalist empire with the United Nations or the American empire,
yeah.
and go its own way and take advantage, full advantage of the beautiful country that Canadians inhabit. But I
Well,
see and I agree. We got to back off of some of this centralization, and we need more checks and balances to make sure we know what the heck is going on.
Well, I mean, this is where like the way that our system is structured, it is designed by like on purpose, like right from our very beginnings to kind of prevent this American style democratic experiment from spreading north of the border. I mean,
Yeah.
this was the loyalists that wanted nothing to do with the American system. And I find it extraordinary when I try to think through how to reform this, how at every stage of I mean, the guys that designed our system were smart. Like they've literally got a fence at every single point to kind of allow the elites to be the ones that decide whether Canada changes, right? And so this is where I run into
Back in the 1830s, they called it in Upper Canada. It was the Family Compact, and
yeah,
in Lower Canada, it was the clique chateau, the chateau clique.
yeah.
Yeah, the
So I mean,
elites controlling. Mhm.
this is what I find like scary about it is that if you can infiltrate that system, you can't get these people back out so easily, right? And at the same time, if you want to reform the system, I mean, you need permission from every single one of the layers that are dependent on keeping the system as it is. Like, you know, it's like a medieval fiefdom, and you
Yeah,
have to ask the lords to grant you permission to change it. And that's where I don't know how to proceed. I mean,
yeah,
if any Supreme Court challenge runs into all the judges that are, you know, of the same belief system as the globalists. I mean, Trudeau has appointed 7 of the 9 Supreme Court justices. They serve for life, right?
yeah.
So at every stage, you can see how you run into a problem. I mean, look at with the electoral stuff that's been going on. It's just a small example, but where Maxime Bernier's party tried to get into the debates back in 2021. Well, they
Yeah.
set the conditions, and he was, you know, just a hair's breadth away, but he didn't qualify. Well, now
Yeah.
he qualifies, so they just shift the bar just that little bit
They
so he's
changed the
again out of
rules.
reach, right?
They changed the rules. They did
Yeah.
indeed. Yeah. Now,
And
another one of our confreres uh, has some ideas on how to back out of this overly centralized system. I'm going to cut away. His name is Brian Peckford. You
yeah,
might know
yeah,
Brian
definitely.
Peckford, and he's got what he calls, if I can get the screen share up, he calls this his Magna Carta.
Yeah,
And I think what he did was he took a look at, okay, let's say that we don't want to mess around with changing the Constitution and going through the 750 rule and all the rest of it. His Magna Carta has an array of points, and I'll just mention a couple of them here. He says registered political parties in Canada must be obligated by law to publish audited financial statements. So here he's going after the party system. And I think the party system has kind of inserted itself between political power and the individual citizen. I think the party is kind of wormed its way in there as kind of a parasite type thing. And so he wants to take a look at their numbers and make sure that everything's on the up and up. That'd be very interesting to see. He says every private member bill resolution presented before Parliament must be debated and voted on within 6 months of parliamentary sitting days from its introduction. He's trying to get more private member bills through. Judges, okay, he's got a whole raft of ideas here about selecting judges and have them go through a review process where citizens have a say in the matter through their elected representatives. He talks about balanced budgets and let's see, what safeguard. committee work. They, the majority just can't take their committees and pack up and walk out the door when things aren't going their way, as we have seen over the course of the last couple of years, many, many times. And the power of the prime minister must be reduced. He's got some ideas there as well about paring the power of the prime minister back. He calls that his Magna Carta. Do you think something like that, or approaches like that are outside of the Constitution, outside of constitutional amendments, could work?
Well, the trouble is who and how do you get it imposed, right? I mean, this is where like
Mm.
which political party is willing to actually take up that banner? And so far, I mean, I don't know if you saw that interview between Jordan Peterson and Pierre Poilievre. I think it was at the 23-minute mark. Poilievre says that, like, in his opinion, the Canadian parliamentary system is the best system of government in the history of the world, right? And
Uh,
not the best government, but the best system of government. And it's like, well,
yeah,
so he's literally signaled that he has no intentions of making any changes to that structure. I mean, this
yeah.
was interesting during the Harper era. He actually initially was talking about doing something with Senate reform. And in the end, the whole thing collapsed because somehow I can't remember the exact details, but it was basically ruled that in order to make any of those changes required opening the Constitution, and that was going to be too complicated, right?
Yeah.
So this is where the system is structured so that the only way that you can change it is that you now have the Senate, which is stacked with a top-down view and is unelectable and unaccountable to the people, having to sign off on all this. Then you have all of the provinces have to get on board, et cetera, right? So
Well,
this is where it's like this closed circle.
you mentioned the Senate, and I saw your paper, your most recent paper, talking about the 17th Amendment in the states and how they need to go back to the way the Constitution originally constructed the Senate,
Yeah,
as being the Senate were comprised of members who were actually appointed by state legislatures.
yeah.
And I look at the Canadian situation. I look at Alberta. Isn't that what Alberta did when it started nominating its own senators and having them go forward? Brown, I think, was one of the senators that was put in the Senate on that basis. So couldn't we do something like that?
Yeah, but they're nominated. They're not actually like provincially appointed. So the prime minister can either choose to
Uh,
respect that nomination or not. So it depends on
okay.
whether the person that's being put forward, like, I mean, if
Yeah.
the NDP nominates someone in Alberta, they'll probably get appointed. But if it's the UCP, no chance, right? And
Okay.
I think this is one of the issues with our system, is that like most of the issues that are the reforms that are required to actually give the people more of a voice is actually a constitutional reform that takes us closer to becoming a republic, where, I mean, we need to split the prime minister off to be elected separately in order to
Yeah.
break the political stranglehold of the parties, right? Because as it is right now,
Yes. Yes.
sure, you can elect your independent, but in the end, nobody elects an independent because they're terrified of the wrong party getting into power. And then once
Well,
they're
just
in,
for my own information, I'm not sure. I mean, is there anything in the Constitution? I don't think there is, that says that a prime minister, that a leader of a party has to be elected by the party, or a prime minister has to come from a party, or
well, see the way
there's
that our system,
convention. There's
yeah,
convention, I know.
see the way our system works is that your local MPs is the only one that you vote for, and then the party that has the largest number is the one that's given the right from the governor general to form a government, and then that party is the one that decides who their leader is.
Yeah.
They don't even necessarily need to pick one of the elected MPs as the leader. So, I
Yeah.
mean, this is like, and I think there was a couple of cases where there was a senator that the party chose to be the prime minister of Canada.
Well, there
So
you have it. I mean, you have we by the charter we have a right to vote for a representative, but once we make that selection, we lose all control from that point on,
yeah.
because then it's up to the party. But what about?
Yeah, but I think this is something that we saw during also like when Leslyn Lewis and a couple of the other conservative MPs had tried to reach out and connect with Christine Anderson, that MP or that
Yes.
politician from Germany, from the
Yeah.
AfD. And
Yeah.
then Poilievre turned around and put pressure on them and said, basically, you guys have to walk this back and give the big public apology. Otherwise, I kick you out of the party. And I think
Yeah.
this is what really disturbs me about our system is that the party leader has complete control over each of their careers, because if you get kicked out of the party, you can continue to run as an independent, but you'll never get reelected. Whereas
Well,
like if you
there's an opening right there, I would see, because the party has no, as far as I can see, has no uh, uh, face in any constitutional papers as being a constitutional right. Maybe that's the opening there, is to change the party system. But
Well, that's the thing is that, in theory, you could, start a different system or run a whole bunch of independents, but you need to get the people on board with that. And they're all so terrified of the wrong party getting into power that in the end, everybody just splits between the two largest parties. Like, I
yeah,
mean, if you look at the American system, you get the Ron Pauls and the Thomas Masseys and all, I mean, even Trump himself, like they are outside of the system. And yet these rogues are able to somehow get their voices into Congress.
yeah.
Whereas in the Canadian system, unless you play ball with the party leader, it's just like it's this closed loop every single time where unless you get this mass awakening among the people that says, okay, we want to ditch this, you're pretty much stuck in that loop. And I mean,
Yeah, and that is exactly where I am. That's a great segue, because that's exactly where I am, is getting the people to understand
yeah,
and educate the people to the point where they can start asking questions and start getting a little bit peeved with the way things are being run on their behalf. And I think we're seeing Americans getting peeved down in the States with this Doge information that's coming out. I think a lot of people are calling for Doge up north. I think that'd be an excellent way to get people to understand better just where their tax dollars are going anyway.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that was that point that I tried to bring up in my latest piece is that like if Trump and them dismantle a bunch of these agencies and trim the government back and down in size,
Yeah.
what's missing there is how do you slam the door so that they don't grow back? Because I mean, the current trend or the current passion for trimming is eventually going to wear out. And at that point, the next guy or the next, even if they have good intentions, is going to start saying, well, we need an agency for this or more money for that. And the whole thing grows right back. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, this is what I find so brilliant about what the original founding fathers did with the Senate, which Woodrow Wilson in 1913 broke that on purpose in order to unleash this ballooning of centralized power, is that he made the Senate appointed by the state legislatures. So it's still the people that you voted for that is appointing these people, but it's at
Yeah.
the home level. It's not from the government level. And so the senators then are essentially on the leash of each state senate. So it doesn't matter if somebody's trying to
But
give
they're
the
acting at the federal level. They're
yeah.
they're leashed by the states, but they're acting at the federal level. I think that was a genius. That's genius. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, like the House of Representatives represented the voice of the people in Congress, and the Senate truly represented the voice of the state legislatures in Congress. And
Yeah.
it's like because they are accountable to the state legislature, they've got to go through every piece of legislation and go, well, you know what? As much as that may sound like a good idea, that eats away at the authorities that are meant to be at the state level. And so
Mhm.
that provided this backstop where you're basically, it's not legislation or rules that is preventing the growth of power. It's actually that like you're pitting two opposing forces against each other. It's the self-interest of the greedy states versus the self-interest of the greedy federal government, but they're all watching each other like a hawk and slamming the door on anything that the other one does that eats away at their powers. And so you basically create this gridlock. I mean, this
Yeah.
is what Justice Anton Scalia, the originalist that used to be like, I mean, he's passed away now, but he was the big originalist voice in the U.S. Supreme Court. He says,
Brilliant.
learn to love the gridlock. It's actually the biggest protection, more than even the Bill of Rights, for small minorities to be able to defend themselves against the tyranny of the majority, because it's so easy to throw this wrench in there. It's the only
Yeah.
reason why the small states, like we have the same problem with what PEI has essentially been sidelined in our system, right? Because they're just a tiny little province. Well, why would when they originally had the American Revolution and then we're talking about binding themselves together, why would little tiny Rhode Island or Delaware tie itself to New York, right? Like if you just go by the way that our Canadian system, which is what they had at that point, works, that those small voices are completely wiped out of the equation. Why would you join? Whereas the
No.
moment that you create this Senate that has, two senators per state, no matter whether it's a big or a small state, and they're accountable to the state legislatures, and yet the Senate has full equal power to the House of Representatives to make laws, to introduce laws. You basically have these two opposing systems that both have to agree. And at that point, it doesn't matter whether you're a small state or a big state. You kind of have a protection at both ends,
You have a Bible say. I guess that's the whole genius behind checks and balances. I think
Yeah.
another check and balance that you know it seems like some people in Canada can use it, Quebec can use it, are referendums.
Yeah.
The Swiss use referendums on controversial issues all the time, and it's another check and balance. It's another way for the citizen to get his voice into those halls of political power. But apparently in Canada, the only people who can do that are Quebecers, I guess.
Well, I
But
mean, this is where like we've got this closed loop. Like one of the things that blows me away is that in 1982 we repatriated the Canadian Constitution, right?
yeah,
And every province signed on to it except Quebec. They said no, that we're not okay with those terms. And then
yeah,
Quebec challenged it at the Supreme Court level, and the Supreme Court judge said, "Sorry, this constitution applies to you whether you ratified it or not." End of story. So basically, what you are left with is either you separate or you live with those rules. Might makes right, right? So there's always at every level that when you think that you've got a way out to try to negotiate this, that's where you end up. I mean, there's the great irony is that when you understand Quebec's history, you understand why they turned to such a nationalist system that finally gave them some power within our constitution. But in the classic scenario of the victim becoming the abuser, they are now using that to squeeze Alberta and the West, right?
yes,
But
indeed. Yes,
but I
indeed.
mean, right from day one, you look at the way that the Senate the Senate in Canada actually is the anchor of the quasi-dictatorial powers of the federal government. It's the exact opposite of the American system,
Yeah.
right? The
Mhm.
the Canadian Senate, you've got right from day one, 24 senators for Quebec and Ontario. Well, you've got 6 senators each for a total of 24 for the entire Western provinces, right?
Right.
I mean, PEI has, I can't remember, like 2 or something like that. Like,
I think I have two. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, so like they're basically shut out of the system. Even when they brought Manitoba in originally, the Canadian government negotiated with the Crown without ever talking once to any of the citizens in the province of Manitoba,
Yeah.
and they weren't even going to be given any kind of representation in Ottawa. And then you end up with the Louis Riel Rebellion, and
Yeah.
things turned bloody, and eventually that gave them at least a couple of voices in Ottawa. But I mean, this is like it is actually terrible that it has to come to those sorts of horrific outcomes. And then, of course, you know, somebody gets that desperate. Eventually, they cross the line and do something stupid, and then that person gets punished. But it's like, well, either both is wrong, or both, or how is that actually a proper scenario where you go after somebody that loses their mind when the government itself is never actually held accountable for their side in it as well. Both is wrong,
I think we're seeing now with the Trump machinations. We're seeing the cracks starting to form. You mentioned Alberta and Quebec. We're seeing those cracks form, and I think there is going to. I don't see us going beyond this point without some major rethink on how we live together as Canadians and just what kind of a country this is going to be. So if ever there was a time to talk about this stuff, I think it's today. And I'm very glad that I had the
Yeah.
opportunity to bring you on board, Julius, because some of your thoughts are really deep and well worth thinking over. And I
I've
hope.
got
Go
I've
ahead.
got one other thing I wanted to throw in on this, because I
Yeah.
mean we also kind of think of it as, we're joining the United States versus staying in Canada. But the United States themselves are rapidly changing. And I think that, I mean, this is one thing that's, whether you agree or disagree with Trump's vision for America, that vision is like the globalist vision, the post-World War II order that America has been living under is coming to an end. Something is about to change, whether we have a say in it or not. And I mean,
Yeah.
if Trump's vision of building a tariff wall around the outside of America in order to try to bring manufacturing back. If that, I mean, he's even talked about getting rid of the federal income tax and switching back to tariffs as a way to fund the American federal government. Well,
Yeah.
if he does that, we either are going to be quarantined on the outside to keep us out of China's hands while doing whatever we want to do on the outside, but we're on the outside of that wall, or we have to find some way to reopen the door to that. And
Yeah.
so like this is where like the other alternative that's been put out is something like what Kevin O'Leary was talking about with this, free trade union between us and America. But the
Yeah.
problem with that is that you basically get the worst of all worlds. You get the American corporations having free reign to come in here and do whatever they want without us having a say in Congress, without us having, and we're still living under the same sort of quasi-dictatorial parliamentary system.
I
So
think all we have to do is look to the European Union to see how that would play out.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and
So I
there's a
mean,
lot
this
of
is where
problems.
it's
There's a
like
lot of problems.
if the world changes, it's like, okay, what in the end gives you the most power to protect your local community at home? And that's, I think, to me, that's the calculation that needs to be kept at the front of all of our minds when we look at the different options, is
Well,
how
this
do
is
we
where
do
I
it and
went
soon,
with that paper I referenced up front, Fisher Cut Bait. I
Yeah,
said there was a time when America and Canada back in the 50s
yeah,
had a very stable relationship. Where Canada through instruments like NORAD, we were a substantial player in that defensive arrangement. With our distant early warning line, with the Air Force we had at the time. We were a viable partner. So if we what if we lived inside that North American frontier, that North American firewall, as a separate country, but as a trusted and valuable ally to uh, to the Americans, like we used to be. And I could see that flying, but
yeah.
you know,
If we could find a way to reform our own constitution and then stay with separate, I think that would be lovely. But
mm,
I don't know the steps. Like this is where,
mm,
it would be interesting to have those conversations with, Brian Peckford and anyone that's actually got experience in government to say, okay, lay out the steps of how we get to reform these things, because it isn't just a few legislations. It is really truly opening the Constitution and having to get every single person involved on board. I mean,
yeah,
this is one of the challenges even with separatism is that like the Clarity Act was came out like to clarify how if a province like Quebec could leave Confederation. So there's actual clear rules, but the reality is that they're not clear at all, because is what it's like you have a referendum and then you have to go into negotiations with the federal government and all the other provinces in order for them to allow you to leave.
yeah, yeah,
Right. And the other thing too is that the federal lands that are part of, like, let's take Alberta as an example. The federal lands stay federal. So now you're negotiating to try to pull a checkerboard out unless the government decides they want to let you. And you are now on a equal footing having to negotiate with every single indigenous group in Alberta because they fall under federal
federal
jurisdiction,
jurisdiction,
right?
yeah,
So now, like like when you look at that, you can see how that process is designed to stretch out over decades of negotiations with the intention of eventually frustrating and say, well, it's been long enough. We need to have another referendum to make sure that the people still really want this. And meanwhile, the thing has been like tied in gridlock for 10 years, and meanwhile the economy's been falling apart, and so that's how you can bring people back in.
yeah. I think I agree that you need steps. You need to lay down the steps. How are we going to do this? But first, you have to have a vision of where you're going to go. Are you?
Yeah,
I propose three courses of actions: go with the
yeah,
states, go it alone, or go with the empire. And if you select one of those courses, then it's time to lay down the steps. I
yeah,
think
very much so.
well, maybe this is the start of that process. Maybe Julius, you and I just kicked that process off, and now Canada is set on a path to its future.
I
What
sure
a
hope
great!
so.
It was well worth it. Eh?
Yeah.
Now, before we go, is there anything C3F members, friends can do to help you? Anything you'd like to pass on to them?
Yeah, I mean, I've just switched over my sort of writing model so that I'm now writing full time on Substack, and have rolled out paid subscriptions on there as well to move away from the ad-supported model that I was working off of with a website before. So feel free to tell folks to sign up. They can go with the free version and check it out for a bit, or the paid one if they want to support me.
Okay, and then the title of the Substack, what's the handle?
It's if you Google Julius Ruschel Substack,
Yep.
or if you go back to my old website, it's still up and running, and all the links point back to the Substack now. So juliusruschel.com.
Okay. Well, okay, Julius, what a pleasure, to have you on board, and a scintillating discussion of Canada's future. So with that, I wish you well, and with your Substack, and we'll probably be talking to you later.
You bet. Thanks so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, Rush.